hiring managers, and even internal recruiters that are involved in the decision-making process in terms of who gets through the first round or the second round or whatever, or oftentimes, the final check before somebody gets the job. So when you're interviewing candidates for a position, what's important for hiring managers to do to get the candidate interested? Because it's not just a one-way streak. It's not just about evaluating the candidate. It's a job, the candidate short market, right? Oftentimes I'll get a requirement from a hiring company and they need to find X, Y, and Z, and it's so niche. So it's more about them selling the candidate on the opportunity rather than the other way around. So how can hiring managers increase their offer to closing ratio? How can they get more people interested and excited and wanting to work for them? What's important for hiring managers when it comes to interviewing? Craig, we'll start with yourself. We'll mix it up.
Okay. Couple of points. One, just like candidates, interviewers need to be prepared when they go into interviews. Look at the CV not 2 minutes before you go into the interview. Have a look, have a read through, design the questions, not the questions themselves, but the criteria should be defined well before 15 minutes before you go into an interview.
Yeah.
But the idea is design questions that are going to be able to assess those criteria or competencies you're looking for, but by personalising the questions a little bit more.
Yeah.
So rather than just going, tell me an example of this, go, oh, I saw that you have delivered this. Can you talk me through how that impacted X or Y, and give us a run through about why you chose to do it in that particular way.
Yeah.
And first of all, that shows that you've done your research. It gives them a minute. Secondly, one of the big things, be transparent about what the role is.
Oh yeah. Oh man. Yeah. That saves so many headaches, right? Yeah.
Hiring managers sometimes wonder why a process doesn't work out once the candidate's been in the job for 3 months. And then sometimes that goes back to, well, you told them the role was different to what it was. So I know people want to fill the vacancy, but to get the right candidate, be transparent with the candidate with what the role is, what they're going to be doing, why the role is open, what the expectations are, and what they can expect from you. So i.e., as a company, what they're going to get back. And if you're honest about it, you'll be surprised how refreshed candidates find that. Tell them what the challenges are. Be open about that. And as much as you want to sell your company, selling transparency is going to be a massive help for you.
Yeah.
So when you're speaking to candidates and interviewing candidates, be honest about the process, be prepared, and be upfront about really what the role is and what impact they're going to be able to have in the role that they're going to be doing.
If you just talk about the good, it's obvious that they're hiding something, right? Not every job's perfect, right? You have to go, hey, full transparency. Here's some areas that are going to be a challenge, and they're going to be hard work, and they're going to be a priority for you to try and fix. And people will respect that. They'll appreciate it, and they'll be more likely to accept the job knowing what they're getting into, rather than just being painted a lovely story, and then 3 months later it's like, what the hell is this?
They often also thrive in that situation.
Yeah.
When there's certain challenges to be overcome, if you've got a candidate who knows that and they thrive under that, then they're going to be interested by the job.
Yeah.
If you sell a job that's all, oh, this is perfect, you're just going to have to do this and this, that might not be interesting to them. Some people are looking for those difficult challenges. So actually selling the role how it is, one is going to get you the right person, but it's also going to get you potentially, if they're going to see that they're going to be able to have a big impact. I mean, I certainly want to go into roles where I'm going to be able to change things, going to be able to do things, going to be able to have an impact. So that's a selling point for me.
Yeah.
So I don't think that, one, we shouldn't be hiding this from candidates because we shouldn't.
Yeah.
But two, it's a selling factor.
Okay. Adam, what's your point of view on what hiring managers can do to create a better candidate experience interview process for top talent?
I was thinking, like talking through the challenges and almost trying to scare candidates off the role, because if they're then still like, oh yeah, like I'm interested in it, hopefully you're then going to get quite a motivated person coming into the role really. So I think it's always just talk through the challenges. Like there's no, because like you say, the amount of people that maybe come in or you speak to, and you're like, oh, you're applying for a job and you've only been with your current company 3 months. So why is that? Well, the job I'm doing is completely different to the one I was sold in the interview. So I think, definitely just be upfront and honest with what the job is. And I think, like I say, obviously when it comes to their questions, be as open and honest as possible. It is always a good thing, and then just again selling it, and more so selling the team that they might be working in, what you guys do as a team together, talking through how often you might have to come, if it's a hybrid role, how often you would expect to be in the office, and almost sometimes set those expectations from the start, really. And as well, I always try to encourage my hiring managers just to be as relaxed as possible, because no matter who you are, I mean, no one goes into an interview not nervous or anxious to a certain extent. You're always, especially now, I find, if even when I've done an interview, sort of externally, and Metro Bank know about it, you sat there just waiting on a Zoom call, and it's just a bit like you're sort of waiting for the camera to turn on, and like, hello. Whereas previously you would walk into an office, you would see someone at reception, you would shake someone's hand and have a bit of patter before you then actually go into the room and start the interview. So I always try to encourage my hiring managers to just, when that interview starts, just have a bit of a chat with them at the start, because I think we now miss that. Well, 95% of the interviews that Metro Bank do in tech anyway will always be virtual now.
Sure.
And just have a chat with someone beforehand and try and hopefully settle them down, because I think that's when you're then going to get more of the real person that you're interviewing, and you put them at ease, and hopefully they're going to give you better answers.
I can't remember who told me this, but somebody said like the key to doing a good interview is to treat it like you're cooking in an oven and not a microwave. Because if you're just trying to get in there and get the answers, and it's just gonna look good when it comes out, but it's gonna be all, like not very appealing to eat, right? If you cook it in an oven, it's gonna be a lot nicer. It's a weird analogy.
That's a great analogy.
I also remember an example of when I was working in a recruitment agency, and I interviewed someone who was going to come and work for us.
Sure.
Walked in the room and she was like bright red, and you could see like she was so nervous. And you spend sort of 5 minutes at the start having a bit of a chat, and you could literally almost see the colour, just sort of like the red just draining and just coming back to normal. And you could like almost just all the way down her neck, and it was just like you could just then see someone's becoming a lot more at ease. Yeah. And like I said, the start of the interview wasn't great, but as it progressed, it just got so much better. So definitely try and just spend a bit of time and.
Okay.
I think Stephen might be able to answer this. Is some of the engineers that I've worked with historically say that when they're doing like a technical interview, for example, that they actually have an expectation that candidates' like level of ability actually drops by like 10%. Because of the pressure that they might be put under. Is that something you take into account when you interview?
I think
engineers?
the sad truth is not enough people take that into account.
Yeah.
That is the sad truth. I'll start by saying both of you guys have hit the nail on the head completely. Like so many quality points. So, like I'm not even sure what I can add to them, because you guys have hit the nail on the head.
Podcast over.
I just want to say, like, hiring managers and companies hiring, I believe, also need to have a lot of humility in this situation, right? Because I think it can be too easy, especially when you're in a company that's in high demand, or you're like the only company hiring in the middle of a recession or something. It can be too easy to just be a bit like short with candidates and not give them that personal touch. You're absolutely right. Especially in tech interviews, there needs to be a lot of training for those engineers who are conducting those interviews to understand that person is nervous in that moment, and there's some things they may not get right, or might take a bit more conversation. Or again, I was saying earlier about like a company might value certain traits. So like I once had 2 interviews in parallel with 2 different companies, and I failed one tech test and I passed the other. Well, I didn't fail it. Like they used some feedback at the very end of the process. And what it turned out is one company actually really valued collaboration. Like, so they wanted you to be asking questions as your first thing that you did, and then and then like giving your ideas based on the questions that you asked. Whereas the other one valued independence, and neither had specified this. So companies need to be like setting setting that expectation of what you're looking for with a candidate, it forces you to be honest with what you're looking for. It forces you to then train your engineers who will conduct the interviews on what they need to look for. I think you're right. You also need to tell, like, people need to understand these are human beings coming in, you know, and some people get nervous. Some people, English is not their first language, so it takes them a little while to understand. You need to consider neurodivergence, like some people need time to think or whatever it is. I have a tendency to stare out the window when I'm thinking, and some people see that as being a bit cold or whatever. All of these things, that training needs to happen. You're absolutely right. And some companies are really good at doing it. Some are not. I want to shout out a previous company I worked at called Bloom and Wild. Like one of their 5 values that they had was
Flower company.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, it was called care. And we inject care into everything we do, and that went from customer services all the way to the tech team. And it really forced the tech team to think about, like, at the start, as you said, at the start of the interview, like, candidate just logs onto the Zoom call, having just like changed their baby's diaper or something, you know, or whatever. And so we were encouraged to spend like the first 5 minutes putting the candidate at ease, just be like, look, we're all working from home. Your Amazon guy might turn up and ring the doorbell. It's all fine. Don't worry about it. Or your kid might run in. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And, you know, just help them be at ease. I've rambled a little bit based from your first question, but
it's useful info though. I agree with what you're saying.
I think you're very right. Companies don't always prep their own interviewers on like what to expect and all of this. And this actually represents wastage in a company, right? Because when you do an interview, that interview is like, for a tech test, it could be an hour and a half, could be 2 hours. You got to do maybe like half an hour prep. You ideally want to do, I set aside at least half an hour to like go through the CV. If there's a tech test, you might want another half hour to read through that code. Then you need to set aside half an hour at the end of that to do a debrief. An internal person from the account team has spent like 10-15 minutes saying this also. Like, so much time has been spent in your company, and if that interview is unsuccessful because your own engineers didn't allow for something that is a natural human trait, then that represents wastage at your company. So that's something for hiring managers out there to consider.
Tech tests quite funny as well, because obviously we now just don't really get involved with them. Some of the hiring, if we're going to do it, we do it as part of one of the 2-stage interviews that we have, and it's usually just dropping a question into the Teams chat and getting them to work through it like that. But again, it's realistically, who works under that pressure? Really, no one's getting right. You've got 10 minutes to answer this question. It's like, well, I mean, a lot of the time, developers are probably just if they get stuck, well, I'll Google it. A lot of the time, who doesn't Google a problem these days? So yeah, we always try and stay away from them. And if we're going to do it, we do it as part of the 2-stage interview process, and we don't have like an hour-long tech test, because it's not really. It's more for us. I think it's generally more about the theory behind things rather than the actual coding. Because I think a lot of people we interview that can code but don't know why or why they're doing it, or what they're typing is doing, if that makes sense. It's more so.
And so some companies, Blue and Wild did this. We offered the candidate 2 options. You can either have the on Zoom tech test where you're writing the code in that moment, or you can do the homework tech test. And that allows, again, for neurodivergence or people who just don't have time. Like, you know, when you got kids, like, your evenings are gone. You know, so it's good to offer those options to candidates, because different people perform different. And you're absolutely right. Like, I look up Google and I look up Chat GPT now 15 times a day. You know?
I've started switching to Bard just because it's integrated into Google, and it wasn't that good at first, but it's now like instantly updated. With GPT, it's it's like a few months ago. And with Bard, it's like real time, so it's really cool. But I'm starting to see more and more companies allow devs to use AI tools when doing technical, because they're going to do it in the job. I mean, and instead of just going on Stack Overflow like secretly on a different tab, I mean, just like they're going to be doing that in the role. So I mean, that's what you do, as a hiring leader. I think something that you mentioned a second ago was really useful about. I think it was Bloom and Wild. One of their values was care, and they told you this before the process. And I remember Metro doing this really well, actually. This was a couple of years ago, but I had hired like a chapter lead developer for you at some point. And I think before the interview, I was sent a pack on your core values.
Yeah.
It was like a maze or
Yeah,
impress or something.
a maze, yeah.
And there was a book in there written by one of your founders or directors or something.
Yeah.
And less than 1% of people will read that book. But my candidate read the book before the interview, and they referenced many points during the interview on how that connects to their core values and things that they've done. Obviously, they got the job because they were to go there. Even I was amazed. I was like, "You read the book? Like, really? Like, oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, like, yeah. So." Telling people what the values are before they start the company, because most people tell them the values after they've got the job, and then it's like values are the sort of thing that often get written on a wall and people look at once a year and they forget about. But the companies that do the best when it comes to hiring, the companies that do the best when it comes to growing and succeeding, are the ones that they actually live those values day to day. And it's not just having the word ambitious written on a plaque somewhere. It's in the cafeteria. It's about when you're doing your one-to-ones, when you're doing your team meetings, when you're doing your wrap-ups. It's like, all right, okay, look, we as a company, we have a mission to be curious. What have we each done this week that demonstrates that value? And sometimes that's a little bit fake doing it that way, but just integrating it into like the DNA of the business is like what I'm trying to say.
And then like you have your annual performance review process where if it is a good process, like you will actually be gauged against how you demonstrate those values, right? So that it's going to come around eventually. So it's worth a candidate knowing that it's like eventually at some point And one of the best examples I can think of is a long time ago, like there was this project and we were all just pushed to work like crazy hours and all of this. And, the feedback I gave on the manager, that was like, okay, yeah, sure, we delivered and the company made cash, but like none of the values were met. It was actually terrible, like it was so aggressive, and this is going to be an attrition risk because people are not going to put up with this. This is not why we joined. This is not how I'm being engaged in my performance review. So why am I being treated this way? So it's something worth bearing in mind. Like those values, you can usually, like you as a candidate can, like if you browse the careers site or even the company's website, career section or whatever, it's usually documented somewhere. And so it's always worth having a quick look at that and then tailoring your answers to show how you demonstrate those values. Because your hiring manager will eventually gauge you on those values once a year.
Yeah, and it's better to do it before they start rather than a year into the job.